And welcome to Marc's Noon Show. Man, this week is flying by. Got a little vibes there with Tribe Called Quest to kick things off. I'm so excited. My guest today, he's having massive success. In fact, he was just telling me that he has some good news from the fine folks at Amazon. My guest is author Maliek Blade. And let me touch in. Maliek, are you there? Are you there,
I'm here.
friend? How are you, man?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I got for some reason. Okay, there we go. I had some interference, but yeah, man. So again, my guest is author Maliek Blade. His book is Whole Brother. Maliek, again, welcome to the show. And let's
Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. Well, let's first talk about who you are, man. Before we even get into the conversation about your book, tell us about yourself, Maliek.
Sure. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and have made my way around the country just with going to school and getting into different things. But like I said, originally from Washington, D.C., I've also went to college in North Carolina, and then I began working in university life. So I worked at a university, a college also in North Carolina, but also in Oklahoma. And I spent some time in California as well. So I've just been all over traveling and exploring a lot of different things. But as far as going through school and learning and growing and transitioning from the D.C. Area, I felt led to put my attention toward charitable work. So a year ago, around this time, I launched a nonprofit called the Whole Brother Mission, which essentially focuses on providing assisted access to men in need for counseling and therapy. Just from my experiences working in university life, but also my family and friends, I saw a need for men to have support services. A lot of times they don't have that, and then sometimes finances keep them from getting that support that they need. So I wanted to create a space that was focused on offering those services to men. So a year ago around this time, we launched the Whole Brother Mission, a 501c3 based in the state of California, but offering services nationwide to any man who may need counseling services. And like I said, about a year ago we launched, and now a year later, we're releasing our first resource, the book, Whole Brother, Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family.
So needed, my friend, so needed. I was just, today I was listening to a debate on MSNBC, and you know how you get caught in your car, like you get ready to get out of the car and there's some content that you just, that you're shocked to hear. So you just end up staying in the car to listen to the whole thing. And so on MSNBC, they were having a debate about the, I guess the 1619 project in New York and, the historical project that they did in New York with an article. And talking about slavery in America, and the panelists, it was like a black panel as opposed to usually there's just one black person, and it was a black panel that actually not only were they esteemed, but they had different opinions. They didn't all agree. And I was in the car, man, sitting there, and they actually on MSNBC this morning, it went for like 17 minutes and closed the show. And I was like, you just don't hear us on mainstream media, and to be honest, we don't hear us much at all. And so a Whole Brother project piece, man, is so needed, and I'm so glad that you did it. And this book, based on what you're telling me, even is that people needed this. They're buying it and they're excited about it. So then tell us about the book and tell us what you've learned. What do we need? What is going on in our community?
Yeah. So I want to make it clear that I don't believe I have all the answers. I think a lot of people have tried to give their 2 cents on what the black community needs right over the years. And not to say that those contributions aren't helpful, but I do think we want to be humble in recognizing that we have our experience, but no one has the cure-all. So in no way is this book a cure-all, but I will say that I think that the uniqueness of what I'm bringing is oftentimes when you have books like this that address the family, that address black people as a culture, it's typically an older gentleman who's far along in life, typically has a family, or is probably a professor, probably teaching African American studies. Those are oftentimes the people bringing the perspective for books like this. Although I am in a doctoral program now, I am 26 years of age, turning 27 this year. And I think it's important to have younger people contribute to this conversation as well, because I think oftentimes the assumption is that people, whether it be millennials or just younger people in general, aren't focused, aren't thinking about community development, and aren't mature. So I thought it was important that me, in this stage of life, writing this book to contribute to the conversation with a current knowledge of how social media is affecting families and how things are just different for this generation coming up, for college students, and even for older generations adapting to the new world that we live in. So I'm bringing a unique perspective on these things, and I'm pretty much addressing, I would say, three main things. One, the idea of fatherhood in the Black community. Two, the idea of mental health in the Black community. And three, how Black men and women view masculinity. I would say those are the three big things I'm hitting on.
And those are three, those are great topics, again, that need exploring. And you're absolutely right. The perspective, I'll be 54 this year. The perspective, even for me as a 54-year-old, I feel like the ideas were outdated. So for a 27-year-old, I know that it definitely needs to be addressed. And I love it. You're absolutely right as far as the standpoint of most 20-year-olds never get the microphone these days on these shows, but they do have the mic on social media. So there's a like you said, there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect because the older generation, like you said, they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily where the younger people are. So you have to politically, just look politically. Like when you look at, working in radio and my wife works in television, I think it kind of keeps us young from a standpoint of we are aware of conversations or aware of the feelings of younger people. And something that, when I would talk to my peers about when, they're always confused. I think a lot of Black folks didn't understand why so many young Black folks felt Bernie. And I used to always explain to them, you have to remember, there was a generation of young folks who came out of college. They bought into the American dream. They came out of college. Many of them spent a ton of money, went to prestigious schools. And not only did they not get a job in the field that they majored in, many of them got a job at Starbucks or got a job at Walmart. And this was like 5 years ago. And so that American dream piece that, like you say, the older Blacks, we came up in a generation where you could get your degree and you may not be in the field that you wanted to be in, but you can make a living and shoot. At the end of the day, you end up living a comfortable living in something that you didn't even have passion about. So again, I'm sure in your conversations, tell us what you found out. What, like you said, what do young people, let's look at fatherhood first. The idea of fatherhood, for me, it was, when I was coming out of college, it was everybody wanted to get a corporate job. Everybody wanted a BMW. Everybody wanted the white picket fence. What is it now?
Right. Yeah. So I would say that it varies socioeconomically, right? So I'm hoping to bridge the gap here between those generations, but also in socioeconomic status. I think the aspiration to get a big corporate job may be the case for certain types of Black people, but there's other Black people, depending on where they are socioeconomically, may not even see that as a possibility. There's guys who grow up in neighborhoods where they look around and the most popular guy in the neighborhood may be a drug dealer. So what we see ends up playing a part in what we aspire to. So what I'm hoping to do here is to address the idea of fatherhood from a perspective of not just saying here's a young perspective, listen to this, but to also kind of challenge the ideas of how older men in our community view being a father. Because there are a lot of critiques that are leveraged against young Black men of today and Black people of today. But I want to create a space to have the conversation that these people of today, you may criticize Gen Z or millennials, but they were raised by somebody. So we have to look back and ask questions about how are we viewing fatherhood to begin with. And one of the big challenges that I'm putting forth is through the myths. Toward the middle to the end of the book, I'm addressing different myths that we believe, debunking the myths that break the Black family. And the myths are typically ideas that we as Black men tend to accept as it relates to masculinity and as it relates to fatherhood. So what I'm addressing here is the idea of how do we view fatherhood? And for many of us, fatherhood is considered protecting and providing. It's just that simple. I bring home the bacon, and if someone breaks into my home, I have my gun ready or I'm ready to fight. sometimes it's limited to just that. And I want to challenge that notion and help us to see, regardless of what generation you come from, fatherhood is more deep and complex than we may have realized. And if a father is lacking in certain areas, it ultimately will affect how his son develops.
That's so interesting, because one of my pet peeves, I was raised by a single mother, and, I've kind of achieved the, like you say, the American dream, the white picket fence. But you're absolutely right from a standpoint of the part that used to kill me and still kills me is especially the older generations. We used to talk about this big argument that we still have in our community about basically a man being in charge of the house. The man of the house is the leader, or, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, but this is coming from people who mostly are raised by single black moms,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, it's a fantasy, just like you said, the provider myth. I mean, the reality was, since slavery, black women had the money. You know what I mean? They had more than we had, because we have been preyed upon the whole time, And so even in the, in the 50s and 60s, dad was out there working hard, but Big Mama had that cookie jar, whether she put the money away and she saved. And so it's almost like we're battling against the myth, and versus like, just being honest and being real. And because, like you said, if you cannot be the provider and you build everything on being the provider, then who are you if you can't be the provider? So it creates
exactly.
It creates this thing, like you said, are you not a man if you're not a provider? And the funny thing about, as I'm realizing at 54, and I look around, even with my peers, there was a point in my marriage when I was, not the provider, but I made the most money, But the blessing was, I never bought into that anyway. So when I lost my $300,000 job and made $25,000 and didn't really even get back close for another 6 or 7 years, if I had based who I was on that, I would have been a mess. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so, and I think that's exactly what happens. But then, like you said, some brothers never even get to that point. Not a knock. I'm just saying the system. There's a reason why when you look at corporate America, or look at, in general, sisters are thriving and brothers aren't, especially as they get older, And so I like the fact that and like you said, the fatherhood piece is tied to, it's all tied together. It's all tied together. The masculinity, fatherhood, and, the mental health, it's kind of all tied together. And so in your book, you're addressing this. And then, is there a shift in how young men look at what fatherhood is and what masculinity is?
Definitely. I don't want to base a whole culture off of social media, but I'll say that there is a culture, and that culture is very active on social media. And a lot of times what you'll see is the idea of just not taking fatherhood very seriously. And oftentimes this was, once again, I wanted to have this community discussion in book form, because I think that a lot of times as Black people, we are skeptical of having certain community discussions because we're worried about, well, what will white people say about it, or how will it be perceived, or will pundits use this as a negative thing to put us down. But I think we have to be realistic that fatherlessness is a real issue, and that ends up playing out in a lot of different ways. And I think today, and this isn't new, but how it's playing out today, and this has happened in years past, is that many of us as men are driven by our sex drive and end up having kids as a byproduct of lacking self-control. So in many cases, there's not this intentional goal of, I want to build a family. It's that I had a wild night, or I had this relationship that I wasn't really committed to, and we just happened to have a child. So you end up bringing a person into this world either accidentally or unintentionally. And in many cases, unfortunately, and this is, not to point fingers, but sometimes we have to have these hard discussions, but there are many situations where people start relationships, they're just a few month flings, and they end up broken up before the child even comes into the world. So we have to be very realistic as men about self-control, sexuality, and how our decisions affect the children we're bringing into the world. They shouldn't be an accessory like a bag or a hat. That's a whole life. And if you're just bringing a child into the world based off of a fling, that's bringing them into a very unhealthy dynamic, especially if the relationship with the mom isn't the best. You're now putting dysfunction on this new life.
We're talking with author Maliek Blade. His book is Whole Brother. It's so interesting, Maliek. I talked to another friend. He's in my age group, and I was kind of like, looking at Insecure, and now we're seeing shows once again. And like you mentioned it, Maliek, we're seeing shows that are produced by young black people that reflect the reality of being a young black person. And that is new for us because, as you said, we were always super conscious of what white folks would think about whatever. If it's not, right. If it wasn't Martin Luther King Jr., if it wasn't the church, right? We didn't see us having sex. Definitely not premarital. So we had this kind of like pure image that we always maintained in public because we didn't want folks to look at us a certain way. So now watching Insecure and these different shows, the Shy and people are getting it in, and I had to laugh because but people always been getting it in. So the friend I called happened to be in a band, and I was just like, yo, was we getting it in like this? And he said, yes. And I had to laugh because Maliek, of course we have, but we didn't see it portrayed on television. We didn't see it talked about. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we didn't, and unlike the younger people, we didn't even hear it in music like that. We heard it more romantic. We heard it, like you said, a certain degree of respect. But this generation, it's out there. But the reality is, though, Big Mama and them did the same thing. They just didn't.
That's how you got here.
That's how we got here. But we just never saw it, And so, and like you said, we sound like somebody's parents. And again, man, I'm serious, Maliek. I actually called my man because I just finished watching, one of my episodes of Insecure, which I like. But I was like, man, every week they're getting it in. But then I'm like, in your 20s, that's what people do.
Right.
But like you said, now. And back then, I guess one of the things was, almost like it was like, look, if you have a baby, it's your responsibility to take care of the baby. That's how we felt about it. And that was not only how we felt, it was like it was expected. And not to say everybody did it, but it wasn't, if you weren't doing it and you just, again, like we reported the other day, Future just had his, confirmed his 8th child, and it was like back in the day, musicians did have them too, but it was kind of like, well, you need to take care of that. That was a part of what you're supposed to do. And it still is, but it does seem like it is a little different now. What do you think has changed, Maliek? Is it the fact that, back then we had the pressure because we're expected to even go to church. So there was almost a standard moral, measuring that happened, including the pressure from your peers. And then maybe that's gone. What do you think changed?
I can't speak for a generation that I wasn't in, but here's what I think happened. Here's what I've observed. I think that the idea of kind of being reckless when it comes to that in your younger years has oftentimes been acceptable, regardless of generation. I think previous generations hid it better. They had a level of PR in mind, and those things weren't broadcasted, although they were done in the dark.
Right.
This current generation now has no shame, and everything is out there. So that's why Future is out here like, here's another baby mama, and he doesn't really mind, And from his perspective, I would imagine him making the money he makes, I can afford it.
And it doesn't hurt. And it doesn't hurt his. It doesn't hurt his image, quote unquote. Right? It really doesn't.
All. It actually bolsters it.
Right.
Because I think as men, unfortunately, a part of what I'm addressing in the book is we praise sexual infidelity. We praise recklessness. So a lot of his fan base are like, oh, that's my guy. And he's then getting all these beautiful women.
What caught me off guard, to be honest, Maliek, I'm not going to throw anybody on the bus, but I was having a conversation, and when Lori Harvey was linked to him, I asked somebody, hey, almost like, what do you think about that? Because it's almost like, it's almost like, how do you think Steve Harvey feels about this? And they were like, oh, Future's cute or whatever. It wasn't, I was expecting, almost like not outraged, but you know what I'm saying? Why would you mess around with this guy when you know he's got, you know what I mean? But I was kind of surprised that it even seemed like even women are more, I won't say accepting, but I guess it is accepting. It is what it is. And like you said, because of the money, it's almost like, well, he can afford it.
Well, here's something that I start off with at the beginning of the book that I think is key for right now. Unfortunately, I think many women have dealt with men who are who cheat, who aren't faithful. And I think as men, we've accepted this idea that we really don't have to be faithful.
Maliek, can you adjust your phone a little bit? You changed a little bit. Did anything change?
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a little better. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think we've accepted this idea. Men get around. It's just the way we are. It's a part of being a man, as opposed to taking control of your sexual desires. And because many of us, rather than trying to change that, we look around and see, well, mom and dad had issues. Apparently, granddaddy cheated on grandma. My cousin has 3 girlfriends. We have accepted it as men and chosen not to rise above cheating. And unfortunately, I think because many of us have doubled down on that for so many years, I think women in many cases have been weighed down and have begun to just accept it. I'm hearing more and more women with platforms saying, you know what? All men cheat. It's just the way it is. I can get over a little cheating. And you're hearing this phrase, I'd rather have a bond over a label. Or it's better that we have an understanding. I don't need the label. So I think what used to be women demanding commitment, they now are accepting a lot less.
Again, we're talking with author Maliek Blade. The book is Whole Brother. As we wrap up, Maliek, give us your last thoughts on your book and then tell us how we can get the book and how we can reach you.
Definitely. Well, my social media is at Maliek Blade, Maliek Blade, and my book is being produced through our nonprofit, the Whole Brother Mission, also available on social media at Whole, WHOLE, Brother Mission. It's our first resource, and our focus is equipping men to be whole in every area of life. So those are the ways you can connect with me and the nonprofit. And final thoughts for the book, I would say that I think this is a great time to have this discussion because with the pandemic going on, a lot of people are at home and forced to think deeply about things. So it's my hope that this book will inspire a discussion for us to reflect about the generational differences, what we've accepted, relationships, mental health, and all those things, even sexuality, so that we can chart a better course. Because I think oftentimes we get so focused on politics and reparations and who we're voting into office, and all those things are important. But none of those things matter if you're struggling and if your family is falling apart and if internally you aren't right. So I want us as a community to take the time to do some individual work and some community work as far as how we relate to each other and what's acceptable and what's not. So I want to start the discussion in a healthy way and look up years from now and see us at a different place.
Man, that's amazing.
The book is available on Amazon. Whole Brother, Debunking the Myths that Break the Black Family. Sorry.
Maliek, thank you so much. Maliek Blade, our author, Whole Brother. Hey, man, we're excited about what you're doing. Look forward for you to come back. And, man, keep up the good work, okay?
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Maliek Blade joining us, and again, talking about real issues in our communities. And it's real, man. You know, I think we have to talk about, I believe, in our character issues within our community. It's almost like the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to bring it up. But I think we really got to talk about it. Thank you for listening. Please share. Make sure you check out Allison and Marc in the afternoon on WHUR 3 to 7. And make sure you share. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you share the podcast. And if you're listening on Allison and Marc app on the radio, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And make sure you also share and let people know to download the app. Of course, iTunes and where you get your apps. All right. Have a great one. We'll wrap things up with After 7. Peace.